Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Michelle here from happyhealthyher.com. And in this week's Compassionate Chat, we are talking about compromise. It is such a common piece of relationship advice that few of us ever even stop to question if it's valid or valuable. If you're like me, you were raised with the notion that all healthy relationships take compromise, which basically means we must sacrifice some of our needs and our wants in order to have happy, healthy connections with others. Well, I no longer believe that is true. Stick with me as we get into some tips for nurturing healthy connections without compromise. So before we even get into that, let's talk about what compromise actually is. So words are so funny. I often find that I'll be using a word for years and not fully understand its definition. So I headed over to dictionary.com and I found that the actual definition of compromise is, when used as a noun, it's an agreement or a settlement of a dispute that is reached by each side making concessions. When used as a verb, it has two different meanings. It can mean either to settle a dispute by mutual concession or to accept standards that are lower than is desirable. None of that sounds good. Lowering your standards or settling a dispute, those are both really negative states of being. So I don't really see how that could truly be healthy. So I've talked before on this channel about how I am such a believer in signs and synchronicities, and the universe often teaches us what we need to know. And my lesson around compromise actually was sort of handed to me shortly before I actually met my partner, who I don't really need to do much compromise with because we both are independent, freedom-minded people who allow each other to be just as we are. So as I share in my book, Online Dating for Sensitive Women, about 5 months before meeting my partner, I went to a shaman and an energy healer because I was feeling so out of sorts and just sort of unclear as where I was supposed to go with my path. And she actually did a palm reading for me, which was so fascinating. And she said I was meant to be an educator, that I had so many different lines that showed that, and that I was most definitely supposed to be writing a book and teaching and sharing what I know with other people. She also said, and I quote, because I wrote this in my notes, "A relationship that is coming will be so comfortable that it will be laughable. It just unfolds and you will not use comparisons because there won't be any." This lovely shaman, her name is Joyce, she actually also confirmed that relationships shouldn't take work. She had married late in life and she had found her partner, and she said it was just so easy. And so she truly affirmed what I now know, that genuine healthy connections don't require a lot of work, a lot of struggle, a lot of compromise. So another message from the universe came at the end of last year. I was actually in the process of cleaning out some old files. I had a file cabinet. And as a lifelong self-help junkie, I keep clippings and articles and things that I think will help me and guide me over the years. And so I found this old folder of relationship articles, and it was literally like this thick. And as someone who grew up on women's magazines, my mom always had women's magazines in the house. She liked to read the recipes, she liked to read the tips, and I would read them too. And what I had clipped from a lot of these relationship articles were things like, "Don't be a nag," or "Men are messy, you just have to learn how to put up with it." And as I'm looking through these articles, I'm realizing a lot of these things I had amassed during my really toxic marriage and relationship with really the first person that I ever dated seriously, which that lasted 17 years. So over those 17 years, I'm reading all these things. I'm trying so hard to make our relationship work. And I'm finding article after article that's basically just telling me to compromise, 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 change who I am, settle for lower standards, which is super crappy advice. By the way, like it ends up leading to manipulation and abuse, and it's often targeted by women or targeted toward women. We are supposed to take the brunt. We are supposed to make ourselves look better. We're supposed to make the man happy, and like really horrible messaging that ends up making the partnership in general unhealthy. It's not healthy for men or women that this kind of messaging is out there. So of course, it made me reflect on all of the incorrect messaging that we do get around relationships. And I'm thinking of my love of rom-coms. I've always loved romantic comedies where they fall in love and it just sort of works out. But even in those comedies, they are often fighting all the time, or they're framed as opposites attracting, and it's very rarely do you see healthy relationships modeled in the media. And we hear all the time, relationships are difficult, everyone fights, love is worth fighting for, or true love requires sacrifice. These are the messages we see all the time, which I think have led many of us to just get into relationships and think, well, this is the way it is, this has to be good enough, when that is really not true. So the relationship I just mentioned, I have said before that this person was a covert narcissist, and I had no idea about that. But also, he was very different from myself. He literally was opposite of me, and I kept telling myself, oh, well, opposites attract, so we're supposed to be together. But he was very extroverted, very fairly high energy, and wanted to go out and be social quite a bit. And I really didn't. After a time, in the beginning, I was trying so hard to be extroverted because that's what the world wants us to be. Society, my whole life was telling me I needed to be more extroverted. I need to come out of my shell. I need to be more social, blah, blah, blah. And I did it. I did it over and over and over again, to the point where I was constantly drained. As an empath and a sensitive person, I was draining myself of my energy all the time. I wasn't honoring my own needs. I was always choosing my partner's needs over my own. And even within that, he still was constantly criticizing, constantly telling me that all the problems in our relationship were because of me. So I would go to therapy and I would read the women's magazines, and I was in this endless loop of trying to fix me when he wasn't trying to do anything to fix himself. So here's the core problem with compromise, is that the very people who are preaching the need for it are generally not following it themselves. This is a very, very classic narcissistic tactic. It's very hypocritical. It's do as I say, not as I do. You need to compromise, but I'm not going to give you anything in the process. Now, the challenge, though, is that even with people who aren't trying to be manipulative, compromise can be a problem. Just the nature of it in general. If a relationship is requiring that you lose or sacrifice something in order to make your partner happy, that is inevitably going to cause resentment over time. You can't help to start to feel resentful if someone is requiring that you be something you are not, that you push yourself in a way that feels uncomfortable. And I don't know why we would ever want to encourage resentment or frustration in relationships. I feel like it's so much better to promote ease and compassion and greater sort of acceptance in relationships. Now, I do want to stress too, I'm not saying we never compromise. We never do anything that we don't feel like doing. Obviously, if you're a balanced and a compassionate person, you're going to have to sacrifice from time to time, especially in the relationships that are less in your control. So places like work, or family, you're not really choosing the dynamics in those places, okay? Let's be honest. So if you decide to participate at a particular job and they want you to be a little bit more extroverted, either you decide to step up or you decide to find a different job that feels better, you know, but you kind of can't have it both ways. You will have to sacrifice a little bit of how your comfort in order to make certain relationships work. That's just life. But in the relationships we choose, that we surround ourselves with on a daily basis, our friendships, our romantic partnerships, I think it's really essential that we choose connections that require very little compromise. Otherwise, you're just constantly working, and that's far too much energy. So the other thing to note is that the nature of compromise, as we talked about earlier, is about just sort of this loss. One person loses and concedes to the other. There's always a third option. There's always sort of an in-between, that if we are really great with our communication, if we are really being bold and honest and courageous with the way we communicate with the people in our lives, and we voice our needs and we ask for what we want, there can be a negotiation process where both parties actually win. Sometimes there's a third solution. It doesn't always have to be a loss for one party or another. I think that there's like an in-between. Like, say for example, you tell your partner, I really am not up for socializing. I'm really in hermit mode. My energy is low. I don't think I can do it. And it's really, really important though that you go to this party. The compromise obviously would be, we go and we stay for just a short period. We stay just to like hang out a little bit, talk to everybody. And then, you know, if I'm really feeling drained, I'll give you like the thumbs up or whatever. And we can get out of there so that I can realign my energies and feel better or more comfortable. I mean, there's going to be a lot of different scenarios, but it is really, really important that we get bold and courageous about talking with each other around these things, because compromise in general requires a careful discussion, no matter how you're framing that. Now, I think it's really important to note the areas where we just can't compromise. Literally, it will be too damaging for your spirit, and it will not last long term. There is no way you can feel happy and healthy on a long-term basis. So as some of you may know, I have several autoimmune conditions. And with an autoimmune condition, your body's immune system literally turns on itself. It starts fighting healthy tissues. Now, energetically, at the root of autoimmune conditions really is that my spirit turned on me. I started being someone I wasn't. It's not a coincidence that my autoimmune conditions ramped up as soon as I was out in the work world, as soon as I had married my partner. I mean, they got worse and worse and worse because I was compromising myself in multiple ways. And we can't do that and maintain health and balance and happiness. So the three places where I believe we cannot compromise is, one, on who we are. So in my particular case, I'm introverted, but maybe you're extroverted or outgoing. So your compromise is that you are not going to do well with someone who just wants to chill and chat by the fire. Like, you're going to want to be out and social, and that's fine. You're allowed to choose that. But don't go thinking that an introvert is going to be able to meet your needs, because they won't. And if you are sensitive, you cannot compromise that either. It's just who you are. It's how you're wired. You can pretend all you want. Believe me, I've done it many, many times. But if you're sensitive to energy, you're going to get wiped out. If you are in areas where there are negative energy or a lot of crowds, or if it's just like sensory overwhelm, you're going to likely get wiped out, whether you try to protect yourself or not. It just happens. So you need to be able to honor that, and your person needs to be able to honor that. So the last video we talked about what sensitive people need in relationships. You might want to check that out. I will link to that below. But again, you cannot compromise on who you are. Number 2, you cannot compromise on what you value. So values are really, really broad. You can have many, many. Most of us do. And they're sort of like the moral compass we live by. They are what is super important to us. They are what we cannot change because they are so at the core and root of who we are. Things like truth, justice, compassion, integrity, a need for safety, a need for love and deeper connection. If you have different values from the people in your world, it's going to be really hard to coexist in a healthy way. But it's really, really important that you have people who have similar values. Because with similar values, there is no compromise. You just get each other, you accept each other, and you're able to sort of support each other in common goals. Number 3, you cannot compromise on what you love. So everybody has their own passions, their own hobbies, their own favorite activities. I would never try to change a partner's hobbies or the things that they love, because I know myself how important those things are to fuel my spirit and my creativity and just my life force. The things that we love, the things we're connected to, we cannot shut off. They have to be nurtured. So I happen to be a very spiritual person, and I was with a partner who was not spiritual, which at first wasn't a big deal, but then he actually was adamantly atheist, and that did not that didn't work together anymore. It's very hard to be with someone who is not supporting your spiritual beliefs if you are someone who's spiritual. So again, not a place you can compromise is on your spiritual beliefs or the things that you are most passionate about. Ultimate philosophy here is live and let live. I really don't expect a lot of compromise in my relationships, and I can't tolerate the need for much of it either. Basically, I'm not asking for other people to compromise. I'm allowing people to do and be who they want to be, and I just ask for the same. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. If that's how you're living as well, that doesn't make you selfish. It doesn't make us selfish. I think it makes us self-aware and fiercely protective of our energy and our health. And I think the older you get, the more you realize you have to fiercely protect your energy and your health. Those commodities are essential for us to be able to do our work in the world and to live with joy and ease. I'm allowed to do what I want to do, and you're allowed to do what you want to do. That's the ultimate premise here. There is no need for compromise and that kind of flexibility. So instead of compromise, consider allowing people to be who they are, giving people their freedom. Someone wants to go to a concert. You don't really feel like going to a concert. I'm sorry, I'm not able to do that today, but you go do you. That's really important to you. Go ahead. I'm okay if we skip date night, or I'm okay if we change our plans. If you want to go with someone else, please go ahead and do that. It's giving people that freedom, again, to do and be who they are. And number 2, instead of compromise, learn to do things on your own. I mean, I think a lot of the basis for compromise comes from one person feeling they need to control or be with the other person on their own terms. When it's true freedom when both people just allow each other to do things separately. I mean, I think some of the best relationships I've ever seen are two really independent people who come together and meld when things overlap that they both love, and then they go their separate ways and do their own fun things and activities independently. That is such a great way to bond and strengthen your relationship if you don't make your relationship so connected or so intertwined that you're not allowed to have separate interests. And then number 3, just discussing your needs and your wants openly so that you can come to mutual agreements. You're not actually compromising, but you're coming to something that's a more mutual, neutral, happy place for both of you. So I hope this was helpful. I would love to know your thoughts on compromise. I know there are going to be people who probably don't agree with me, and I respect that. But I did think this was an important topic because I do know that in my life, my desire to always compromise really got me into a place of poor health and distress. And I really don't want that for anyone. I really want everyone to be able to shine their light and live the happiest, healthiest life they possibly can. So if you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing and sharing with friends. I really appreciate your support. And as always, I wish you happiness and good health. Thanks for being with me.